The night was quiet. Too quiet. A small fast food restaurant in Alabama was closing for the night. The lights were still on. The fryer was cooling down. The smell of grease hung in the air. Then, gunshots shattered everything. By morning, 2 men were dead. No clear suspect. No fingerprints. No camera footage. Just fear. And somewhere else in the same city, a man was sitting in his mother's house, watching television, unaware that his life was about to be erased. Before we go any further, pause for a moment. Stories like this change the way you see justice forever. If you want documentaries that uncover the truth layer by layer, subscribe now. And as you watch, tell me in the comments whether you believe the system always protects the innocent. Now let's go back. The police were under pressure. 2 murders, both fast food managers, both shot in similar ways. The city wanted answers. Fast. The public wanted someone to blame. And when fear spreads, facts often take a back seat. The detectives started looking for patterns. Same type of restaurant. Same kind of gun. Same kind of bullet. That was enough for them to believe the same person had done it. But believing something and proving it are 2 very different things. Not far away lived a man named Anthony Ray Hinton. Anthony was quiet, gentle, shy. He worked odd jobs. He loved his mother more than anything. He had never been in serious trouble. No history of violence. No reason for anyone to fear him. But Anthony owned a gun. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't illegal. It was old. A revolver his mother kept for protection. In that moment, that gun became the center of everything. The police took it. They sent the bullets from the crime scene to a state expert. The expert looked at them and said something that sounded confident, even scientific. He said the bullets matched Anthony's gun. Those words would echo for decades. Anthony was arrested. When the handcuffs clicked shut, he thought it was a mistake. A misunderstanding. Something that would be cleared up once they realized he had an alibi. On the nights of the murders, he said he was at home, with his mother, watching television. She confirmed it. But no one seemed to listen. The case moved fast. Too fast. Anthony didn't have money. He couldn't afford a good lawyer. The court gave him one instead. The lawyer was kind, but unprepared. He didn't hire his own expert. He didn't question the state's expert in a meaningful way. He trusted the badge. He trusted the system. That trust would cost Anthony everything. In the courtroom, the expert spoke with authority. He said he was certain. He said there was no doubt. The jury listened. They believed him. Anthony watched their faces. He searched for signs of doubt. He didn't find any. When the verdict came back, guilty, the room went silent. Then came the sentence. Death. Anthony was led away, not fully understanding what had just happened. He thought, they'll fix this. He thought, the truth always comes out. He was wrong about one thing. The truth would come out, but not for a very long time. Death row is not like prison in movies. It's smaller, quieter, slower. It's a place where time stretches until days lose their meaning. Anthony was placed in a cell no bigger than a bathroom. Concrete walls, steel bars, a thin mattress, a toilet a few feet from his head. This would be his world. Days turned into months. Months into years. Anthony waited for his appeal. He believed the courts would see the mistake. They didn't. One appeal was denied. Then another. And another. Each denial felt like a door slamming shut. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, Anthony stayed frozen in the moment his life ended. Then came the executions. Men he spoke to through the bars were taken away and never returned. Sometimes they said goodbye. Sometimes they didn't. Anthony would lie awake at night, listening for footsteps. Every sound made his heart race. Was this the night? He tried to stay strong. He prayed. He read his Bible. He talked to his mother on the phone. She told him to keep faith. She told him she believed him. She told him she loved him. Those calls were his lifeline. Years passed. The gun, the key piece of evidence, sat locked away, never questioned again. The expert's words were treated like truth carved in stone. No one looked deeper. No one asked the uncomfortable questions. Except one person. Far away, a lawyer was beginning to doubt cases just like this one. He had seen patterns before. Poor defendants. Bad experts. Confident testimony hiding weak science. He didn't know Anthony yet, but the path toward him had already begun. Anthony didn't know this either. All he knew was that he had now spent years waiting to die for something he said he didn't do. At one point, he asked a guard how long he had been there. The guard told him. Anthony realized something terrifying. He had been on death row longer than many people serve for murder. Still, the system insisted it had gotten it right. Halfway through this story, ask yourself something. And write your answer in the comments if you're watching. What would you do if the law said you were guilty, but you knew the truth? Anthony kept waiting. He kept hoping. And without knowing it, he was getting closer to the moment when one small crack would appear in a wall that had seemed unbreakable. A crack that would change everything. The night was still quiet. But somewhere, doubt had finally begun to speak. Time does something strange on death row. It doesn't move forward. It circles. Every day feels the same. Yet every day carries the same fear. Anthony woke up to the sound of keys and metal doors. Breakfast slid through a slot. Lunch came the same way. Dinner too. Some days, no one said his name at all. When that happens long enough, you start to wonder if you still exist. Years passed like this. Outside the prison walls, Anthony's mother grew older. Her voice on the phone became softer, weaker. But every time she spoke to him, she said the same thing. I know you didn't do it. That belief kept him alive. Then one day, a guard stopped at his cell longer than usual. He said a lawyer wanted to see him. That almost never happened. Most lawyers came once, maybe twice, then disappeared forever. This one was different. His name was Brian Stevenson. Brian didn't arrive with promises. He arrived with questions. He asked Anthony to tell his story from the beginning. Anthony talked for hours. About his life. About the gun. About the trial. About the expert who said the bullets matched. Brian listened closely. When Anthony finished, Brian didn't say, I'll fix this. He said something quieter. Something about this doesn't make sense. That sentence mattered. Brian went back to the evidence. He read the trial transcript line by line. When he reached the expert's testimony, he slowed down. The words sounded confident, but the science behind them felt thin. So Brian did something no one else had done. He asked another expert to look at the gun. A real expert. Someone trained in firearms identification. Someone respected. Someone with nothing to gain. The expert examined the bullets. He examined the gun. He examined the state's conclusions. Then he shook his head. He said the bullets did not match. In fact, he said something even more shocking. The gun could not have fired those bullets at all. The case rested on a lie. Not a lie told in anger. Not a lie told on purpose. But a lie born from incompetence. The state's expert was not properly trained. He had overstated his ability. He had claimed certainty where none existed. That one mistake had sent a man to death row. Brian brought this information to the court. He expected shock. He expected urgency. He got resistance. The state argued that the original verdict should stand. They said the jury had already decided. They said reopening the case would create chaos. They said finality mattered more than doubt. Anthony listened as his fate was debated like a technical problem. Another appeal was denied. And then something darker happened. Anthony was given an execution date. A real one. A day. A time. A method. For the first time, death was no longer a distant idea. It was scheduled. Anthony was moved to a different part of the prison. The walls felt closer. The air felt heavier. Every goodbye suddenly sounded permanent. He called his mother. She cried. She begged. She prayed. Anthony tried to be strong for her, but when the call ended, he broke down in his cell. He had done everything right. He had told the truth, and it still wasn't enough. Days before the execution, Brian filed an emergency motion. He brought the expert's findings again. He argued that executing a man when the key evidence was wrong would be an irreversible crime. At the last possible moment, the court stopped the execution, not because they believed Anthony was innocent, but because they needed more time. That distinction mattered. Anthony remained on death row. More years passed. Brian kept fighting. He uncovered something even worse. The state's expert, whose words had carried so much weight, had failed a basic test given to firearms examiners. He did not meet the standards he claimed to have. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a system failure. The prosecution knew this now, but instead of admitting error, they defended the conviction. They argued that the expert's confidence mattered more than his qualifications. Anthony waited. He watched more men disappear. He began to lose hope. Then tragedy struck. Anthony's mother died. She never saw him free. When the news reached him, something inside Anthony went quiet. The person who believed in him without question was gone. He would never hear her voice again, never feel her hand through the glass. For a long time, he stopped talking. Brian worried that Anthony might give up. But deep inside, the truth still lived. And slowly, painfully, the courts began to change their tone. A judge finally agreed to look at the gun again. Not to argue, not to debate, just to see. What they saw could no longer be ignored. The evidence that had condemned Anthony simply did not hold up. The foundation of the case had collapsed. But even then, the fight was not over. Because proving the system was wrong is one thing. Convincing it to admit that wrong is something else entirely. If this story has you holding your breath, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part reveals what happens when the truth finally stands in front of the law, and the law must decide whether to look away or face it. The silence on death row felt different now. Not empty, not hopeless, but waiting. And this time, something was coming. The courtroom felt colder than Anthony remembered. He had been inside courtrooms before, but this one was different. This time, the truth was no longer a whisper. It was sitting right there on the table, in the form of reports, tests, and expert opinions that could not be brushed aside so easily. Anthony was brought in wearing prison clothes, shackles around his ankles, chains on his wrists. He had been in these chains for so long that they felt like part of his body. But inside, something had changed. For the first time in decades, he felt the ground beneath the case begin to move. The judge listened as Brian spoke. Calm, careful, patient. He explained how the original firearms testimony was wrong. Not unclear, not debatable, wrong. He explained that the state's expert had claimed certainty without proper training, that he had failed basic exams, that no real firearms expert would have made those claims. The state tried to defend itself. They argued that mistakes happen, that the jury believed the testimony at the time, that reopening old cases would weaken trust in the system. But something in the room had shifted, because now the evidence was being tested under light instead of shadows. The judge ordered new examinations, independent ones, neutral ones. The gun was tested again and again. Each time, the answer stayed the same. The bullets could not have come from Anthony's gun. There was no physical evidence tying him to the crime. None. What remained was fear, pride, and the quiet pressure of admitting a terrible error. Months passed while the court delayed its decision. Anthony was returned to his cell to wait. Waiting was something he knew well, but this waiting felt sharper. Every delay felt like the truth being held just out of reach. Then, one morning, a guard came to his cell. "Pack up," he said. Anthony froze. Those words had only meant one thing for decades. But the guard's voice sounded different. "You're going to court." Anthony's heart raced. His hands shook as he gathered his few belongings. A Bible worn thin, letters from his mother, years of life folded into a small box. In court, the judge spoke slowly, carefully. Every word mattered. He said the conviction could no longer stand. The sentence was vacated. Anthony did not understand at first. Then Brian turned to him and whispered, "They can't keep you on death row anymore." Anthony's knees almost gave out. But freedom did not come immediately. Instead, the state faced a choice: retry the case or let him go. The prosecution reviewed the evidence, or what little was left of it. No gun match, no witnesses, no new leads, nothing. After nearly 30 years, the state quietly dropped all charges. No apology, no explanation, just a signature on paper. Anthony was led out of the courtroom. The doors opened. Sunlight hit his face in a way he had not felt in decades. He stepped outside, unsure if the ground would hold him. He was 60 years old. He had entered prison in his 20s. The world had changed. Cars looked different. Buildings were taller. People walked with small glowing screens in their hands. Everything felt loud, fast, overwhelming. Anthony had no money, no home, no family waiting at the gate. His mother was gone. Freedom, it turned out, was frightening. Brian stayed with him, helped him learn how to live again, how to use a phone, how to cross a street, how to make choices. Anthony struggled with simple things. Supermarkets felt like mazes. Too many colors, too many options, too much noise. At night, he sometimes woke up gasping, expecting concrete walls and metal bars. Freedom did not erase 30 years of fear overnight. But Anthony began to speak. He told his story to anyone who would listen, not with anger, not with hate, but with calm honesty. He talked about the cost of mistakes, about what happens when confidence replaces truth. People listened. Then something rare happened. The state of Alabama agreed to compensate him, not because they admitted guilt, but because they could not deny the damage. Anthony received millions of dollars. Money cannot return lost time. It cannot bring back his mother. It cannot erase the sound of footsteps at night. But it gave him a chance to live. Anthony chose to do something unexpected. He did not disappear. He traveled. He spoke at schools. He stood in front of judges, lawyers, and students. He told them what nearly perfect mistakes can do to human lives. He reminded them that the system is made of people, and people can be wrong. As Anthony stood in front of crowds, some asked him the same question again and again. How did you survive? He always gave the same answer. I believed in the truth. And maybe that was the most powerful thing of all. Because for 30 years, the truth waited. Quiet, patient, unmoving. And in the end, it spoke. If this story has changed the way you see justice, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the system learns from cases like this? Or is it still repeating the same mistakes? One final part remains. Not about courts or evidence, but about what comes after freedom and whether justice ever truly arrives. Freedom is not a finish line. For Anthony, it was a doorway into a world that felt both beautiful and painful at the same time. Every morning, he woke up in a quiet room, not a cell. No bars, no guards, no count. For a few seconds, peace would wash over him. Then memory would arrive. 30 years does not disappear just because the door opens. Anthony had missed everything most people take for granted. He had never used the internet. He had never owned a cell phone. He had never chosen what to eat for breakfast from a store filled with endless options. Even crossing the street felt dangerous. Cars moved faster than he remembered. People didn't look at each other anymore. They stared down at screens. The world had moved on without him. At first, Anthony stayed quiet. He spoke softly. He smiled politely. People expected anger. They expected bitterness. But that wasn't what they saw. What they saw was a man trying to understand how he survived something that should have broken him. He often thought about death row, about the men who didn't make it out, about the nights when he listened to executions happen down the hall, the sounds, the silence afterward, the empty cells the next morning. Those men were not headlines. They were voices, faces, names. Anthony carried them with him. Sometimes, when he spoke at events, people would ask him if he hated the system, if he hated the people who put him there, if he wanted revenge. Anthony would pause. Then he would say no, not because what happened was okay, but because hate would not give him back his life. Instead, he focused on something else. Truth. Anthony began working closely with Brian Stevenson and others who fought for people the system had forgotten. He told his story again and again, not to shock, but to warn. He explained how one confident voice in a courtroom can outweigh facts, how poverty can decide guilt before evidence is even heard, how silence can be mistaken for weakness. He explained how easy it is for a mistake to become permanent. People listened differently when Anthony spoke, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't have to. His presence alone asked a question no one could ignore. How many others are still waiting? The state never apologized. No official stood in front of a microphone and said, "We were wrong." No one explained how an unqualified expert was allowed to decide a man's fate. No one explained why it took 30 years to correct a single error. The system moved on. Anthony did not. He tried to enjoy the simple things. Walking outside, feeling the sun, choosing his own clothes, laughing without fear that someone would take it away. But grief followed him. His mother should have been there. She had believed him when no one else did. She had aged and died while waiting for the truth to come home. Anthony visited her grave and spoke to her like she could still hear him. "I made it out," he told her. But freedom without the people you love comes with its own kind of loss. As time passed, Anthony wrote a book. Not to accuse, not to attack, but to remember, to document what almost vanished into silence. He wanted the world to know that justice is not automatic. It must be protected, questioned, watched carefully, because systems do not feel pain. People do. Anthony's story began to appear in law schools, classrooms, and courtrooms. His case became an example, a warning, proof that confidence is not the same as truth, and that science, when misunderstood, can destroy lives. Yet, even with recognition, Anthony stayed humble. He often said that he was not special. He was just lucky. Lucky that someone listened. Lucky that someone asked questions. Lucky that the truth was tested before it was too late. That word, lucky, hung heavy. Because justice should not depend on luck. Anthony Ray Hinton walked free after nearly 30 years on death row for crimes he did not commit. That is a fact. Documented. Undeniable. But the larger truth is harder to face. For every Anthony who makes it out, there may be others who don't. Men whose names we will never hear. Cases that will never be reopened. Mistakes that will never be admitted. The night that began this story was quiet. So was the cell where Anthony spent decades waiting to die. And so is the question his story leaves behind. If the truth can be buried for 30 years, how long has it already been buried elsewhere? The screen fades, but the silence stays.